Guys, I've tried to record this intro, I swear, maybe 8 to 20 times. Every single time I feel too stiff. So guys, I apologize, but this one is just going to be loose and goosey. A yapper, someone who won't shut up, someone who will never be quiet. Who is a yapper? I am a yapper. Why am I a yapper? Because my father was a yapper, because my grandfather was a yapper. That's not the important point. The important point of this video is that we're going to be analyzing every single word I've ever said on stream. Caveat, technically speaking, I only turned on closed captioning like 6 months ago, so that's not covering every word, but it'll be covering most of them. Now, there will be a time jump. Skip it if you don't want to hear some nerdy stuff. Either way, let's get into the video, and I hope you enjoy. I've always wanted to do a voiceover, so I hope you guys enjoy. As you can see from your screen, I'm using RStudio. RStudio is a coding interface that allows you to use R along with many other languages, including Python, which, guys, at one point I did try including when I was trying to implement a neural network, and that was literally a nightmare. AMD GPU. I'm using RStudio just because that's something that I'm familiar with when it came to school. And honestly, I just physically cannot use Python. I need to be able to see my data and see my graphs. And you know what? In the comments, if you have suggestions of how I can do that in Python, and if you say Jupyter Notebooks, exactly, silent. Thank you. Moving on. I originally got all this data by adding a service just intended to add closed captioning to my stream. I was just trying to make my stream a little more accessible. What turned out was I was collecting all of these transcripts of every single stream. And I realized I have all this speech data. And I thought I could make a pretty cool project if I analyzed the speech data. Not only, you know, obviously YouTube video, but also just for myself, because I speak a lot. And honestly, I don't really know what I'm saying half the time because I really just go on autopilot. So not only did this become a project where I could look at how I speak, it also allowed me to analyze my diction, my verbiage, and just understand what does Twichty really say. From the video, you can clearly see I'm not making that much progress. Guys, this was a very difficult process for me. Not that this process is hard. I just truthfully am not the best coder and I don't have a lot of experience. The base of my project ended up being around this library called SRT. This library specifically is meant to split up SRT files. However, I don't think I should have used this. I should have used tidy text. Just in the moment, I was really focused on that SRT file subtype. Overall, this project is a pretty simple one. It was just taking a bunch of text data, sticking it in one data frame, and then doing very simple analysis over it, whether that's counting the unique words I was using, the filler words, or doing other formatting. There's some fancier things I tried to do, but I don't necessarily think they're as successful as I hoped. Do I ever want to do this again? No, because now I have a script. So every time I stream now, it goes into a transcript folder, which then can be just analyzed by the script and added onto the data. So as I keep streaming, maybe I will do a check-in video in 2 years, 4 years. And I think it would be really interesting just to see how my vocab grows, maybe if there's a change in my words. Now you might be saying, Twichty, shouldn't you save the output of this so then you can compare it to last year's? And you know what? That's a great point, and that is something I should do. Either way, I hope this was somewhat explanatory. If you want more information or if you have more questions, feel free to leave a comment below or catch me on my stream Monday through Sunday, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. PST. Ask me any question. I'm always happy to answer. I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Let's jump into the analysis. Now, as you can see, wouldn't you love to know, lover boy, what does the duck say? Guys, I was enjoying a duck pun here or there. I love a banana duck. To start off with, we've got a word search. Let's try something simple. Wizard 101. Wizard 101 being one of the main games I play on Twitch. If I search this, you'll see I said Wizard 101 297,387 times. That doesn't seem real, does it? I don't believe it either. But I've said it 531 times. As I'm saying, it's a pretty cool search feature. Now, let's think of a few words, you know, that Twichty may or may not say. For example, Shrek. I have said Shrek 3 times. Now, I don't know why it instantly updated, which, honestly, kind of surprising. I thought I would have said Shrek more. Now, one you might be interested in is, guys, I tend to not swear on my stream, or at least I attempt not to. So let's do a little gander here, shall we? 36 times is not that great. 0 times, exactly. 0 times exactly. This should be, I'm not gonna lie, yeah, that kind of tracks. Exactly. Why, guys? Because I don't swear, because I know what's up. Thank you very much. Either way, as you can see, it's a little fun. We can search words. Some words I've said more, some words I've said less. Now, you might be looking down a little bit, and you might be saying, what is that? Well, this is what we call a word cloud. What do you see in the sky? A cloud. Huh. What does a word cloud do? It's a visualization of how many times I've said something, but in terms of size. Now, it's not great for visualization because the human brain, if you didn't know, has a really hard time discerning the size difference between objects. That's why, guys, I, Twichty, am a hater of pie charts. Pie charts, more like, either way. As you can see here, I say a few things frequently. I've said and the number's a little hard to see, so I will read out to you, 145,297 times. I've said guys 43,542 times. Now, if we go down here, what I did between these two was I removed all the articles. Articles being the, this, other such things. Now, you'll see, for example, like this is gone, a few other things. And what you really see, which I think is the most interesting, is you see that guys expands dramatically. Why? Because of the words that are said here, it's the most frequent. And as you can see, we see a few words appear that we didn't see before. For example, like actual. Also, God. I've said God 5,601 times. I hope he's heard me by now. Damage, feel, little, God. As you can see, I've said so many. Even mouse over here, we see I've said fail 106 times. I've said FPS 77 times, which honestly is pretty interesting. Because guys, you want to know how many words I've said on stream? Roughly 2.3 million words. Give or take, some of that's a little ooga boogad. And if we break that down to just English dictionary, it gets a little smaller. But either way, out of 2.3 million words, 77 times I said FPS. It's pretty cool. Now, let's break it down a little bit. If we look at my top 10 most frequent words, mind you, I just want to clarify, this data set is not cleaned to the level that I could clean it. I've said as we know, over 150,000 times. To, the, a, you, these also being articles, not surprising. Guys, I say guys all the time. I literally can't help it. And, okay, like, is, right? Filler words, these are not particularly surprising. We got on to the longest words. You'll see the first kind of issue with my data set. Hyperbolation, hyperbole, essentially, interaction something. Now, I don't know if my splitting of the text is wrong and or I'm saying those words essentially as one word, so that's how the transcript is working. I'm not really sure. But as you can see, these aren't really my longest words, but technically if they are, then I've said a word that's over 23 characters long, which I think is pretty cool. Shortest words, believe it or not, I've said essentially the entire alphabet at some point on my stream, which I think is kind of funny. And apparently I've said all the numbers. So, wow, look at that. Now, let's deal with the garbage. What this means is I'm going to be bringing some words that shouldn't fit in my data, aka there's a few words that are a little mixed when they get cut off, or they're a little wonky, or for example, they're not an English word. And as much as I want to keep words that aren't English words but are English words, it was much easier to just cut out everything that was an English word. So you'll see here are some of the top words I've cut out, which will be kind of interesting. For example, I. Now this is because I also removed any word that was less than 2 words. Why? I don't know. It defaulted and I thought, I don't really care. I removed I'm, which, give or take, I don't know. Cause all I've, now you see a more interesting, Cheeto, for example. Guys, shout out Hot Cheeto. I hope you watch this. As you can see, I say your name a few times. Dorito, I say Dorito's name a few times. Not the snack, someone who watches me. As you can see, I say a few people a few times. I say some numbers. I say YouTube a lot. And that's interesting, it's not an English word. Either way, as you can see, this is basically the original count and then my English count, which I don't know why it has the difference. Essentially what it's just saying is I've removed all of these that many times. Overall, total I removed about 21,000 words for about 314,000 occurrences with an average of 14 occurrences per word that was removed. You get some, you lose some. If we look at English, I removed 21,000 words. So we're looking at a much more refined data set of just what we would find most likely in a dictionary. And from this, you can see there's a lot more words that are larger in volume, which makes sense. Because a lot of those smaller words that are going to kind of like cloud it up and take away from the masses, in my mind, are some of these more abstract words. So obviously I say my, no, have, going. And as I took away I, had I included I, that would have been a big one. Because if we go back here, you're seeing I'm removing 145,000, 48,000, 31,000. As you remove those most frequent words, the other words that are similar in size, aka frequency, will be similar in size. So, and, my, no, going. As you can see, I say a lot of things. Now, we remove some articles. You can really see it's those big things and things get smaller. So guys, obviously, still being strong. Mean, 4,547 times. Just going, we get the picture. Now, before I was comparing to the English dictionary, but you can see here, this is where I'm analyzing my text exactly for nouns and verbs, because I thought that'd be an interesting way to break it down. Here are all the nouns. And you might be thinking, Twichty, going is not a noun. That's because I'm an idiot, and these are all the verbs. You can see going, no. No is my #1 verb at 27,630 times. We've got going at 22,000. We've got think at 14,000. We have at 14,000. Do, 12,000. Mean 6,302 times, which is interesting because if we go over here, I say mean 4,547 times. That may be an indicator that, guys, some of my analysis is not perfect. And we're not going to deal with that one. We're going to keep going. Now, you see nouns. As you can tell, the only thing I ever say is guys. And then everything else, game 4,000 times, damage 3,000 times, thing 7,000 times. As you can see, guys. Now, this is where we look at my most frequent words, but we slice it down a little. We're looking at a smaller subsection of what I'm saying, aka we're really comparing it to the English dictionary, not so much everything I've ever said. Because as much as I would like to filter it for the extraneous, there's not an exact guaranteed science way because I'm dealing with 2 million. Mind you, with English, I believe, with English observations, we are looking at 1.9 million. So it's still so much data to cut down on. I didn't really have an exact way to do it. Anyways, as you can see, I say anyways a lot. Anyways, always, and, as, for, guys, hope. As you can see, the count is very high. But again, this is an interesting thing. You see guys here, I'm counting roughly 3,000, whereas here I say 42,000. You know, I'm saying, Twichty, were you even trying with this? Guys, I'm not that good at cutting. Let's move on. Ignore that. Longest word, this is where, again, this is a little more the correction comes. Telecommunication, miscommunication, responsibility, misunderstanding, miscommunication, incomprehensible, hyperventilating, characterization. These are words that I could imagine me saying and make sense and much fit. And then shortest English. Theoretically, I thought I removed 2-letter words. I might have a lot of data sets and I might have not been the most organized. Either way, you can see or on my, not the alphabet, makes sense. Now, this is an interesting thing. How many words do I say? And as you can see here, this is looking at cumulative unique words. And this is looking at my word index chronologically. Essentially, as I loaded my files in, I was reading them chronologically, top to bottom, file A to file Z, which meant that theoretically, this is chronological. And I believe that's true. Am I 100% sure that was what my code was doing? No, but that's what we're thinking. Here it's saying roughly, I said almost 40,000 unique words. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do I believe of this? I give it an 85%. I think this kind of makes sense. Looking at the code, it logically makes sense. And one thing you might be saying, Twichty, there's no way you know that many words. And I agree. However, what you may not think about, I read a lot of dialogue. I read a lot of what people type in my chat. There's many things that I read which would dramatically add to the amount of unique words that I say on stream that I wouldn't normally say when I'm speaking. And so that is where I think this number could possibly be right. Now, if we look at per file, this is a little more interesting. This is a breakdown of every single streaming file. And as you can see, it says streaming transcript, it has a number, it has a date. And if we look at total words, we'll see my longest one on February 9th, 2025, and I technically have streamed longer than this stream, I'm pretty sure, but this is obviously when I started doing transcripts. I said 84,000 words. I said 13,000 unique words. And now, lexical diversity simply has to do with how diverse I was speaking, aka how many words was I saying versus unique. It's total words versus unique words, roughly. Do I believe that, guys? I always have the handy dandy calculator here. Let's check it out. 13,019 divided by 84,503. We get 0.1539. Obviously, you're going to round. So 0.154, exactly. It's just this ratio. This is how diverse. And you can see it's not the most diverse. If we go to my most diverse one, you'll see it was on February 16th, which makes sense because I speak 6,000 words. And so the less words I speak, obviously that's going to increase that ratio dramatically. But you'll see even here, the only highest I ever got was about a quarter of the words I said was unique, which I guess is kind of impressive. I'm not really sure. I thought this was a cool way to look at words too, just to see how my different streams led up. We're going to look at the average word length over time. And this kind of jumps back to the idea that as I'm loading these files chronologically, theoretically, if I look at the data from A to Z, it should roughly be chronological. And I'm pretty sure. So if we see my average word length, now this is the binge approach. What does that really mean? It means I'm taking sections of the words. So if you imagine a total data frame, Let's say there's 1,000 rows and I'm bidding it at 100. That means I'm analyzing at 100 words per second, and there'll be 10 bins. As you can see, I have a chunk index of almost 600. And this is because I was bidding roughly at 4,000, because I found 4,000 was kind of how many words I spoke in a stream. You might be saying, Twichty, there's no way. And now I kind of agree with you. Maybe that was a dumb, you know what, guys? That was a dumb logic, and I don't know why I tried. Either way, I'm just bidding it. And as you can see, it ranges roughly, at most, I'm saying 4 on rare occasions, down to about 3.8. And what I also did was a rolling average, I did 4,000. And you see, it's kind of the same number. As you can see, we're roughly sitting around 3.8 to 4.1 on average word length. Now, sentiment analysis. This is a pretty interesting one. If you don't know what sentiment is, the meaning of sentiment is positive or negative. You have like positive connotation, negative connotation. The sentiment of my action was positive. So this is looking at every single word I said for a file. Actually, this is overall. And it's seeing were the net words I used positive or negative connotation. If I said this is an awesome, great, amazing video, you should subscribe and like it and watch me on Twitch every single day, that's mostly positive connotation. If I said that people who don't watch my videos and don't like my videos and don't watch my Twitch stream are stinky, losers, and lame, that would be negative connotation. And so in this essence, this is positive minus negative word count. As you can see, overall on my streams, I'm positive, which I'm going to be honest here. Of course I'm positive, because, bro, why would I try to be killing the mood? Plus, I like to think of myself as a positive person. You will see this one file, I am negative. You might be asking, Twitch, did you ever hunt this down? No, I did. Why, guys? Because I don't want to be in the negative. I don't want to live in the past. Overall, as you can see, I'm pretty positive. You can see it shifts. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. What's kind of interesting is you kind of see like waves, which I feel like makes sense, because I feel if I necessarily have a bad stream, the odds of me having another great stream aren't as high. And I feel like it kind of follows my mood, where as I have better streams, I get more excited about the next one. And sometimes, apparently, I'm just not having it. Also, mind you, this could also be what I'm reading in chat, for example, or what I'm reading in a game. There's many possible explanations. Now, this is an interesting one. Speaking of now, filler words. Everyone uses filler words. It's a common way to express yourself and put some pause in your speech, whether you don't know what you're going to say, or it provides some ability for the listener to understand what you're saying. I'm a pro of filler words. However, I will acknowledge they don't maybe make everything sound as they should. And as you'll see here, this is a rolling average, smooth a 10 chunk window. Don't ask me. Either way, the point of this is just kind of look at what filler words am I using and how have I used them as I grow. And you'll see here, I've actually been seeing kind of a large growth. This is roughly the beginning of my streaming when I started doing transcripts. I didn't really use actually that much. It went up, literally has gone up and down. Basically, at some point, apparently I said basically 10 billion times, but it's kind of a down streak, which I think is good. Like looks pretty consistent, which makes sense because I feel like like's pretty generic. Has really, now an important thing to notice here is also the axes, because technically speaking, none of these axes are starting at 0, which is, always look at your axes. If your axes aren't starting at 0, that's bad to begin with, because that makes graphs a little more misinforming. That's a statistics tip in general, guys. When you're looking at data, we're gonna ignore it for now. I say a fair amount. And now here's the interesting thing. It's saying I'm never say I don't necessarily believe that. I don't really know how exactly the transcripts are working or when it's cutting out. It could be I cut out. I don't really believe that. But literally it's pretty interesting. So makes sense, because why would you not say so? I just think it's interesting overall, you know, just looking at kind of the different changes as my vocab changes. Here's another visualization, which I was just trying to make it a little more understanding. This is also using a rolling average being, which I guess I didn't explain. A rolling average is when you're going to take a section of data and you're going to average that and then you're going to move on. A very common one, especially when it comes to sales data, is the 7-day rolling average, where you're going to compare 7 days of sale, let's say Monday through Sunday, and then you compare Tuesday through that Monday, because that's another 7 bin, and that allows you to kind of look, but you're doing a rolling, because the point of a rolling average is to kind of get a bigger picture of how your day is changing. It's to understand the trend at a larger thing. Either way, as you can see from here, there's really not that much interesting. It's kind of the same situation where, you know, we see that like is obviously my most frequently used word. These are a little less. So is very consistent. Literally is kind of down here. And it's a little hard to see, which is why I didn't really want to stick with this visualization. Now, one thing I did, and I apologize, a little wonky of a presentation. I want to just look at the words as a big picture. So if we look at the words, as we've already seen, these are word counts. We already kind of looked at them before. 84,000 is the most I've said during the stream so far. It's a fair amount. If we look at this, this is 3910. Now, this is 309. Now, if I go back here, we look here, this is 309. Some consistency in my data. That is good to see. That is good to see. we'll see here. We look here, lexical richness. We've already seen this. Average word length. Here's one we haven't seen. As you can see, February 23rd, my average word length was 3.83, which I'm not gonna lie, I really thought my words were longer than 3. Like, obviously that's almost 4, and mind you, guys, an average is always affected by outliers. There's also just generically an outlier, which we imagine is something estranged from your data, whether it's super big or super small. That can be very influential to the mean, so I could have looked at the median. Hindsight's 52 billion. As you can see, 3.8 is smaller than I thought, but I didn't think I was that smart when it came to words. Net sentiment, which I kind of enjoyed. If we look at this, we'll see that February 2nd, I had a net segment of 1,653, which is interesting. My streams average on 3 hours. If you imagine a 3-hour period, I only said 1,653 words more positive than I did negative. It doesn't feel that much more positive than negative. It's also interesting, you know, it's not near Valentine's, but it's in the month of February. So I wonder what I was feeling. I think you see 1,400. Overall, I'm glad I'm positive. Filler rate generally is very low, so it's kind of hard to judge. At max, it's about, I would say about 2.5%. You can see here of the words I say are filler words, which I think is a pretty good amount. I think it means I speak a lot of content on my streams, which is why you should check them out. And then here's a net sentiment, just another example. These are my files. It's a little ooga booga. Getting it to display in this form is a kind of a nightmare. Overall, as you can see, you know, I have some higher and some lower, and it kind of makes a nice chart. It's not an exact chart. It's interesting. Now, this is LDA. I never heard of LDA. LDA is an analysis type where you're trying to predict essentially the topic of your text. This is a little hit or miss. I don't necessarily think this is for really a transcript. And also, obviously, as I stream, what I'm talking about wildly changes. And sometimes you would think that I would be talking about a video game, but you can see something interesting here. Now, to explain quickly, you'll see that this is topic 1. Essentially, for topic 1, which I basically choose a number of topics, and I'm not really going to get into the stats behind it or the modeling because, A, I don't really know it, and B, it's not really important. For topic 1, you see the term, for example, guys, cuz, and yeah. These are the probabilities that these are like the heavily influenced terms that apply to the topic. It's not telling me what the topic is. It's just telling me the terms that apply to it. And how it's calculating these, I assume, is by shifting some number in a model, which then results in different things. However, what I would say generally what you can see is guys, because I just say guys so much, it makes sense. Damage, play, literally. It's not that interesting. And honestly, all these numbers are so small. At most, we're seeing, you know what? 10% is, well, 10% is not small. But that's guys, which the issue is obviously guys. So moral of the story is most of the time in stream, I'm just talking about y'all, and that's what you should watch. And also, I guess that's pretty good. This is my vocab growth over time. This is cumulatively unique words. This is interesting. I'm not really sure what's wrong with this graph. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, don't trust this graph. However, I would say trust this graph. Why? Because this graph tracks a little bit better. This is, no, actually, I know exactly what's going on. Guys, this graph is built off of my English edition. It says English edition. Guys, read your titles. It says English edition because this is just my English, which makes way more sense. 40,000 because think, whenever I mention anything in a video game, if you named every single enemy in Wizard 101, that would probably be 1,000 new words. There's so many words in video games that are made up, and that's how it adds the vocab. This being English is roughly around 17,000, which I think makes more sense. And hopefully, not hopefully, but I would assume, guys, if I did this video again in a year, we're going to see at some point this is going to plateau. And not because I'm losing vocab, but at some point I will have said most English words that are common, whether people are typing them, I'm saying them, or in even a video game. And once that happens, I hopefully will see a plateau, and I think that'll just be very interesting to see. And as you can see, generally, the amount of unique words I say is growing over time, which makes sense, because as I stream longer, I will say more things. Now, per file, we see here, this is looking at it, but from an English standpoint, unique words is less at 3,000. My diversity, even my diversity is a little bit lower at only 20%, but still pretty good. Generally, it's just reduced, which makes sense because obviously we're taking away a lot of words. Some words that I don't think are words and the transcript is just messing up, and other words that are just in video games. Looking at it from an English perspective, average words, we see the average words go up, which is interesting, and I think makes sense because less than 4 is strange to me because I feel like 4-letter words are very common than that. Like, for example, are very common words that I would probably use a lot when I'm speaking, and so it being less than 4 I'd find surprising. This is just comparing the bids to the average, to the rolling average, which we see very similar numbers. Sentiment analysis, once again, this is just English edition. You can see I'm more negative now, which is interesting. If we look here, I'm dramatically more negative, which I wonder what gaming terms it's determining as positive that are negative. And I guess that's something, if you guys want, I could explore in another video, because here we're looking at positive about 200 words at max. I mean, not max, maybe max is 250, but this is much more closer to neutral, which I think makes more sense. I would describe myself as a positive person, but I would think even when it comes to reading stuff, the amount of negative and positive, I feel like there could be a mix. I do wonder, there's certain games I could play, for example, Detroit Becomes Human, where there's a lot of negativity, and I wonder if that weighs into it of me reading dialogue. Now, looking at rolling average of word usage, it's not really that different. So still there, literally, actually, basically, like, nothing's really crazy. Is a little wonky, but overall, it kind of makes sense. Looking at our mega files. So this is looking at topics again, but from an English analyzed standpoint, we see crazy all of a sudden gets up there for topic 1. It's a little organized a little differently. I think it's a little more readable. We see crazies up here topic 1, but once again, guys is kind of dominating the charts because a 2% is not a lot. Like, it really is not, and it's really not applying to the topic or explaining really anything. 11% is almost relevant, but not really. As you can see, it doesn't really know, because I'm telling stories and each story is so different, it doesn't really know where to sort it, and that makes sense. I had one last thought as I was going to coffee, as you can see, which is, what word of every length am I saying the most frequent? If we look at this, and this is regular data set, we're going to see I, obviously I said the most. 2 is the second most at 61,000. The, 54,000. Guys, 43,000. Don't, 27,000. That's 16,000, because 8,000, actually 5,000. Something 3,000. Absolutely 1,000. Technically 800 times. Everything's 241. Longest word to highest frequency is unfortunately at 1,082 times. And the recommendation, I really recommended something 48 times. That's surprising. Congratulations, 39 times. And then you see we kind of get into these longer words, and some of these don't make sense. And now if we go to the English edition, you see that we have telecommunication, miscommunication, responsibilities, once again, is up there. Congratulations, recommendation. Unfortunately, it's not really that much different. I just thought it was interesting to see what words am I saying that I'm saying so much of each length. Now, guys, hopefully this was interesting to you as it was to me. Hopefully it brought you some sort of insight. I think overall what I get from this is just, guys, I talk a lot. And I'm excited to talk a lot more, and I hope you join from that journey. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, please subscribe, and check me out on Twitch anytime. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your night. As always, sweet dreams. Thank you so much for watching.